Sorry. All right.
Hello, everyone. This is Dave March calling from the Land of Confusion show, where today we're interviewing KEPHALITHOS. We're actually trying to figure out his name because even he apparently doesn't know how to spell his name or pronounce his name.
I can spell it, but I can't pronounce it.
And I'm joined also today by my co-host Flicker from Guam for now, and or maybe for in the future by the talk. But yeah, so we have we have a question from. We'll start off with the members' question. We had a question from Western Chauvinist wanting to know what is the story of your name? Why did you choose it, and what? It's a very specific name. What's the history of that person?
So for the longest time, I just used my actual name, which is Chris. Or I have my full name, Christopher Riley. I mean, I don't care. Look me up, do whatever. But anyway, and then at some point, I think when I started graduate school, I thought maybe it's not a good idea to have my name on these, polemics. So, so I used some other name for a while, but I didn't really like that. So I looked at my icon because I had been using this picture of a relief carving on a building, which is a little face with a mustache, And so I thought, okay, there are people who just make their own names using ancient Greek. There's Miss Theocracy famous, on Ricochet. So I went to an ancient Greek dictionary, found the words for stone and head, and I just combined them into a word. So that's my name.
Okay. So
it's not self-referential at all, really.
It sort of is. I mean, I'm stubborn, so.
Okay. So going through your the back and the brief background. I gotta get rid of that. Sorry, I was just. So yeah, so it says here, what was it? Where did you grow up, and what was it like growing up there?
I grew up in Columbus, in the great state of Ohio, and I do mean that when I say it's great. A lot of people bash it for some reason, but it's the Midwest. It's nice. It's pleasant. There are deciduous trees here, So that's where I spent all my life. I grew up in one house and then moved to another just down the road. And I had a normal suburban upbringing, I guess. I went to a public school. I didn't really, I'm sure I can say some things about Ricochet. I don't even know how I found Ricochet. I just found it one day. Maybe somebody recommended it to me or something, because I was starting to become interested in politics and things like that. And I joined Ricochet and didn't comment very much. I was afraid of commenting because, other people are scary, I guess. And then I went off to college at Hillsdale and then to graduate school in Kentucky.
You broke up there a little bit.
And now I'm back in, not necessarily in Columbus, maybe.
Seem to have a pause here. I don't know. Maybe they're just continue talking and I'm not.
Okay. Yeah. There's a lot of lag.
Yeah. Might turn off my.
On your end, maybe I don't.
No, you're good.
Oh.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
So what did you study? You said you.
I'm going to try. Hello.
Very
sorry
nice.
about that. We kind of crashed out. My internet completely crapped out on us in the beginning of the show. So maybe I can merge it back together. But why don't we these kind of things happen when you're in the fabulous world of live recording.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm not going to finish answering. I'm not going to finish answering your question though. But I would ask you. Well, I will.
Yeah.
But Dave, this is about me, so I don't know that this is really appropriate for the for the show, but I mean, I've looked all over the United States, and it seemed to me like Texas is good, but I like deciduous trees too.
Yeah.
And the best place for firearms and the lowest and the place that doesn't tax your Social Security earning income. Yeah, it turned out to be Georgia, and it didn't get tornadoes, and it doesn't get hurricanes, and it doesn't, and it was essentially a red state at the time.
Yeah,
and,
at the time.
But now that with the Delta and the Lambda and the Gamma variant and the the Zebra variant.
Are there in the Greek alphabet? Eventually, it'll be like, I mean, it's like naming hurricanes, I guess. Eventually, people will run out of names for that, and eventually run out of names for the virus.
Well, I can tell.
Beta, alpha, zeta, theta.
Georgia's still pretty much a red state. They just kind of screwed up about 3 months of time got distorted into a weird time warp or something, and it should be fine by 2022 is what I can tell.
Yeah, well, then again, maybe when we're through recording, I'll get into my thoughts about moving back to the United States as a whole.
Yeah, but looking at things down there, it does seem to be, from what I can tell, it's the last gasp of this weird COVID situation, and the administration believes, despite all evidence to the contrary, that lockdowns are still popular, and that they're going to try and go for one last, thinking that it's going to save their bacon. But we're getting a lot of conflicting signals out of the government, and I think they've kind of realized that maybe these things aren't as popular as they originally thought. That, and it might deliver California to the Republican State House. I was watching a show yesterday with a guy who does very accurate polling, and they did a deep dive into the situation in California, and they're like, they're unless something drastically changes, they're pretty sure that Gavin Newsom will be recalled, and Larry Elder may well be the next governor of California.
But will the legislature change?
No, it'll be a hiccup in the same way that the Georgia elections were hiccups for Democrats in this special period, and much the way that Louisiana wasn't, or was it? No, who was the one who ended up electing that Democrat after the local Republicans elected a crazy person?
No,
it was Jeff Sessions' seat when he gave it up to be Attorney General, and they lost the seat to a Democrat because they ran a very weird character as the Republican replacement. And so a state that went 70% for Trump both times had a Democrat in for like a couple of years.
I think that was Alabama. But
yeah. So yeah, Alabama. So we do see that happening. So I think there are political upsets every now and then. I mean, Illinois elected a Republican governor. You had New Jersey elect Chris Christie twice. There's sometimes the weirdness of politics leads to a weird situation every so often. And I'm dropping again, of course.
Crazy, but because I always end up going, well, tell me about the nature of everything. but right now, Keph, we were talking when we sort of went off the air. We were talking about you got a degree in history because it was sort of a grasp.
Yeah.
At the end of your 4 years, I take it, and then you went to where did you go to school for grad school, and what did you study?
I'm going to see if one thing will help.
Obvious architectural history, local history, things like that. So when I graduated from Hillsdale, I thought, okay, I guess I can invest in this, make this into my career, throw caution to the wind. So I enrolled in a graduate program in something called historic preservation, which is not really a legitimate academic discipline on its own, but I was in it for the architectural history. So I sort of studied architectural history in college or graduate school. And then I've found a job working in basically, I probably shouldn't say too much because who knows, my employers could be secret Ricochet, members. I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
Basically I work for a company that's basically a parasite on the administrative state, and it does a lot of environmental regulatory compliance. And part of this, by a very strange process, involves architecture. So I'm working for this environmental company, doing a lot of odd jobs and things. Not really what I expect to be doing, but it's something. And I can work from home, and the company's not woke, so that's good. Right?
Yeah.
So what? I mean, this fascinates me because gentrification is an issue, but if in cities, their neighborhoods have entire characters of their own, and they were often built at much the same few decades. You've got that, but you've also apparently worked from home, so you do a lot of paperwork. I don't want you to give away anything too particularly.
That's a good question. My job doesn't involve a lot of documentation. I mean, my company has people whose job it is to just travel the country and take pictures of things. So I don't really do that. I mean, I look at what they give me. I do a lot of background research. And there are a lot of things that aren't related at all to architecture. I mean, I spent a lot of time looking at blueprints for cell phone towers and antennas on roofs. And, so I've become familiar with the way these things are designed, sort of, which is strange, again, unexpected, but.
And that has to do with historic preservation?
I don't know. I mean, that's the question. So, I mean, the laws about this say that whenever a company like AT&T or Dish Network or Verizon, whenever one of these companies wants to build a new cell phone tower, they have to make sure that it won't cause any environmental problems, that it won't destroy any archaeological sites, that it won't require demolishing or damaging any historic buildings. So I was hired to deal with just the historic building part of that. And I've done a lot more. But I mean, most of these laws are unnecessary, really. Anybody with common sense could look at these projects and say, well, this isn't going to damage anything. Let it pass, But there's this sprawling bureaucracy built on, judges' rulings and just non-legal recommendations issued by different regulatory agencies. It's just this massive thing that's built up around environmental laws.
Now, are these really laws? Let me tell a quick story. I stayed in a bed and breakfast from, it was a part of a massive estate that the then Silk King of the world it was Connecticut, I think it was.
Okay.
Stayed at, and he was rich enough that he would bring in speakers and ballets and Mark Twain spoke more than once, I think, to his workers, and he would do this for free. So these were marvelous old buildings, and I was staying in one, and he mentioned or something, or I asked something about the insulation in the windows because it was so old. Of course, it needed a lot of airiness and so forth, and yet it was freezing cold outside in the winters in Connecticut. And I asked him about the windows, and he said he had them all replaced. And I said, "Oh, really? What were the roadblocks to this?" And he said, "Well, I'm condensing this a lot, but essentially the roadblocks didn't exist because he just did it. He replaced the windows with hand-made, hand-measured, because every window is a different size, minutely, hand-measured, triple pane, argon, I guess, filled, I don't know, windows." And no one ever found out about it until the spring, when the next groups of tourists would come by on guided tours of historic buildings, and somebody asked about the windows, and he said, "Oh, I had them all replaced." And the woman giving the tour had, gasped and nearly fainted. And he said, "Listen, it cost me $15,000 last year to heat this house for the winter. And for that price, or less, I suppose, I replaced all the windows, and you didn't know the difference, did you?" And he
well,
just did
that's
it.
the important question: is did he do a good job replacing them, or did he do
Oh,
a
yeah.
bad, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Because there are, there are replacement windows which look like they could be plausibly old wood windows. I mean, you can replace windows in a way that respects the character of the building, or you can just buy something at Home Depot and reframe the opening so the window fits, and then it looks like crap. And
right. Well, these were all handcrafted windows.
Yeah.
Specifically to every existing frame of the building.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But he can afford that because he's, he lives in Connecticut. He probably has a successful business. Not everybody can do that. So windows are always a problem in old buildings. But you said that there are no barriers. Now, I wonder if he was living in a place that didn't have any rules, any local regulations, anything like that, because all regulations that would prevent somebody from doing something like that are local. There are no real national ones, or even state ones.
Apparently, it was the local society that said what buildings were special and who could replace windows and who couldn't. But they had, I think, they had no legal clout. I think that they weren't legislated. They just existed.
Yeah, I mean, there are local boards of architectural review, that's usually what they're called, that are run by local governments, and they're given the blessing of the national government sometimes. But that's really, a lot of people complain about things like the National Register of Historic Places because they think it's a violation of property rights, but it really isn't. It's just a way of gathering information, really. All regulations of this kind are local, unless they have to do with documentation and unless they apply to, say, telecommunications companies or municipalities building new roads and all of that. But basically, as long as you don't live in a place where there's one of these, where if you don't live in a place where the local government cares, you can do whatever the heck you want, whatever, as long as it's the code.
Right.
Which is really how things should be, because most places don't have a lot that needs to be protected or would need to be protected. So,
well, what he said was that generally speaking, for these houses, is you really need to have it has to be a rich neighborhood and a rich owner, because they're the only ones that can actually take care of these buildings and keep them as they historically appeared. Otherwise, they fall into disrepair and they fall down.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, what often happens is that they're covered with, well, everything is replaced or covered, vinyl siding, vinyl windows, everything's stripped off for the sake of maintenance. They end up in the hands of lower income people who don't care about and don't have the means of properly maintaining or restoring them, or they end up in the hands of landlords who just, are interested in renting out rooms. So, but I think we're at the point now where basically most things which are unrestored have either been so altered that they've lost their character. Well, so there are those things, and then there are well-maintained buildings which have been properly maintained and restored. Usually the owners are wealthy or are people who care about local history and architecture and all of that. So there's a sort of bifurcation in the housing stock, of the country. Whereas if you had just walked around 50 years ago or 100 years ago, obviously things would not have been altered very much at that point. But anyway, I'm just going off on tangents.
That's what we do here.
That's good.
I can tell you in Ontario, it is a little bit different. I have friends and my church, for example, has gotten themselves designated in this 1950s or 60s. And they want to bulldoze half the church, and they're not allowed to because of what happened. They're like, we can't maintain these facilities, so half the church is falling down. and they're like, we love to sell it off, we love to destroy it. It's like there's a gymnasium that they can't use anymore.
Oh yeah.
They're not allowed to do it because of the rules.
Well, what about rot? I saw a beautiful building, I think in Alabama, that we went back to 1852 or something like that, and it looked like it was sort of a Greek revival style or something like that. It's a beautiful building, and I think that by the time we were looking, it was even featured in a national magazine as a good rehab potential. But I think that two people had tried to restore it, and I guess had run out of money. But so much of the building, so much of the first floor of the building was rotten that they basically had to, I mean, it's like making a suit by replacing half the material.
Yep.
And how does that fit into his non-legal historic preservation, just preservation societies and the love of the property and the legal regulations? How do they deal with this? If you own the house, do you have to keep it up? If you buy it, I mean, do you have to restore it?
No, I mean, again, it depends. It's a local thing, so it depends. I mean, there are places, I mean, obviously, a lot of these neighborhoods that are designated historic districts that have local governments regulate things, there are codes that say you have to keep your property up. You can't have plants growing in your gutters. The porch can't be falling off the house, all of that. But as far as internal things are concerned, I mean, that's completely unregulated. People can do what they want, the inside of a person's house, which is where a lot of structural things are, I mean, there are houses that probably look like they're well maintained from the exterior, but are actually dumps and maybe endangered. I mean, rot is a problem. I mean, in a place like Alabama, it's very humid, rainy, so it's even more a problem there. I mean, things have to be maintained, and if they're not maintained, then they fall apart. And then there comes a point where it's just extremely expensive to reconstruct them. And it's possible to reconstruct things, but most people don't have the money and the time for that. So they just settle for demolition. And, slowly the number of old buildings decreases just a little bit each year. And
Dave, can I ask one more question?
Okay, go ahead. You're rolling.
Okay. How does your current job, how does it kindle that interest, that fire for architecture that you had before you got the job? Or does it?
It doesn't really. I mean, there are no dream jobs in this field, at least not now. There's a lot more action in the 70s, around the time of the bicentennial. People were actually going out and discovering things and doing research. Basically, academic architectural history is just applied critical theory now. So I knew when I was in graduate school that I couldn't be in academia. I couldn't just stay there. I mean, my professor would make fun of me for having old and moldy interests because, I cared about going out looking at things instead of talking about, how the building is a manifestation of patriarchy or whatever. I mean,
you really had to think like that?
Oh, absolutely. So I read a paper in graduate school, a journal article that made the argument. This was in, a geography journal or something, and geography is insane. Geographers are crazy. But anyway, it's not about old maps. It's about, so this particular piece argued that landscaping is a form of spatial oppression because somebody has to determine where to put the landscaping and what shape the landscaping takes. And it constrains movement. You decide to plant a bunch of flowers along a path, and the person has to walk along the path. They can't stray off into the flowers, and that's constraining the person's movement, and therefore you're dominating the person. So landscaping is oppression. So that's the kind of thing that people in graduate school are doing. I applied for an internship once, and I didn't get it. I didn't expect to get it, but the person who did wrote her thesis about gender and horse farms. So anyway, so I knew academia wasn't an option. So I just thought, okay, I'll do something practical and it's pleasant. It's not ideal, but it's the best I can do given the circumstances. So, oh well, So, I mean, I still go out and explore with my camera and look at things, and that satisfies me. So,
well, that's good. Okay, Dave.
You'd find some interesting things around here. I'm sure we have a lot of we call them castles, but they're like nice manor houses made in the early 19th century.
Yeah.
So,
where in Ontario do you live?
I live in Hamilton, Ontario.
Okay. So that's sort of at the center, sort of north of Niagara Falls, right?
Yeah.
But sort of close.
In the elbow of Lake Ontario between Toronto and Niagara Falls. But we have people come visit here from Vancouver, and they're like, look at all these old buildings, and it's like 100 years older than them, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if I missed this earlier when you were talking to Flickr, but you mentioned Trump gave a make architectural great again. What was that about?
Yeah, that was fun. It lasted for 2 seconds, but it was a fun news story to follow. I loved seeing the of course, all the professional preservation organizations came out opposing it, because the sad truth is that a lot of preservationists are modernists. And I could ramble about that for a while if you really want me to, but
well, give us kind of why the difference, what is wrong with the modernists in a few minutes, if you can.
Well, so basically all architects working now, with a few exceptions, and a lot of people involved with history and historic preservation, have a basically Hegelian historicist view of things. They think that there really are no standards by which we can judge something. We can't call something beautiful. We can't say that this or that is good architecture or bad architecture, except insofar as it expresses its time. The thing that matters is the zeitgeist. They don't really use that word, but it's that kind of thinking. So people will say things like, well, if you design a classical building now, you are committing, and you're making something that's fake. It's historically inaccurate, because the zeitgeist of our time is not classicism. It's whatever Frank Gehry is doing, it's big glassy blobs. So there's this idea.
You're not allowed to say blob. You're not allowed to say blob.
Well, whatever it is, I don't know what to call it. It's not really architecture, it's sculpture. But but anyway, so people have this idea that doing something like Trump did, saying that buildings shall be constructed classically, is an act of historical inaccuracy. We're building things that are lying. That you can't do that. The past is untouchable. We can't do the things they did in the way that they did them. That's wrong. So there's that idea. And then, of course, people say, well, classicism is fascist. So it's fascist and it's wrong because it's committing some sort of act of violence against history. So don't do it, So, and then there are weirdos like Duncan Stroik, who's a classical architect. There are a bunch of people at Notre Dame who actually teach classical architecture and practice classical architecture. And they don't think this way, but they're a minority. So they liked the executive order. I mean, I had mixed feelings about it because I don't think classicism is the only legitimate architectural style. I think that inventing new ones is fine and good and part of what a healthy society does. But we've lost the ability to do that. So revivalism is fine. So building things in the styles of old is an acceptable alternative and something that people have been doing in our civilization for hundreds of years. So,
but every Roman or Greek style building in the United States goes back is appropriating an architecture from 2000 or years before.
We're culturally appropriating history. I'm like, seriously, this is an argument.
But I mean, but people have been doing that since the country was founded, since before the country was founded. I mean, we've been doing that since the Renaissance. It's part of our DNA. So I don't see why we shouldn't keep doing it, because at the same time people did that, they also invented new things, and the new things worked. by the old rules. You know, I mean, the problem with modern architecture is that it breaks all the rules. I mean, I think there are reasons why old buildings tend to work, you know, above and apart from the fact that they're classical or Gothic or whatever. But modern architects just don't care about things like ornamentation. They don't care about texture. They don't care about detail. And they design their buildings the way a sculptor would just sort of design a sculpture. It's an abstract form, a single thing. You know, if you listen to an architect talk, most of them just go on and on about spaces, but they never talk about surfaces, texture, things like that. So I think there's a lot that's wrong with architecture, but I'm a pessimist. I don't really think that it's going to change anytime soon. So in the meantime, we have to preserve what we have.
We're going to be lighting the candle for Leibowitz in the realm of architecture.
Really.
You know, I've got to say, I like old stuff. And when I look at the brickwork on a building, to me, I think these people went out of their way to make this actually attractive to the eye, rather than just be a factory, which is what it was built as, a 3-story factory, taking up a city block. But I'm always struck by one time I was in Singapore. Have you ever? In Singapore, I'm standing on the sidewalk, and behind me to my left is I think a 150-year-old synagogue built in the Greek tradition. To my right is I forget. I think it was a glass, and it was something maybe like out of the 60s. Building, but it was very, very attractive. And across the street was this thing a building that looked like a landed flying saucer. And I think it was designed to look like that. And somehow all these buildings seemed to be friendly with one another, if that makes sense. They didn't seem out of place. It was eclectic architecture everywhere. And you could appreciate it in every building, but they didn't seem to clash. They didn't seem to dominate one another. And I was just wondering, I was just pointing out that even though I like Greek and Roman style, I really did appreciate this modern stuff, especially the huge freighter that they put on the top of three 30-story buildings or whatever they were. You know?
Yeah, I mean, that's an accomplishment. Making a flying saucer fit into a city. No, I mean, that's.
But it did. It worked. It really worked.
But I mean, you know, I guess if it's going to work anywhere, Asia is a place where this sort of futurism can work. I mean, it's just the way people in that part of the world do things. You know, they have.
The only other place I can think of that is like that is Houston, from what I've heard. Yeah,
I hate Houston, but I don't live there. Right? Houston can be Houston. I just don't want Columbus to be Houston. You know.
Okay. What I was going to ask.
As home.
Yeah. So you still live in Columbus then?
I do. Yeah.
So I've been there a few times. I don't know if you ever heard of the Origins Gaming Convention, but I've been going down there every year for that, and except for last year. It's a great town, but it has changed a lot. Have you noticed that as well since over the last few years, decades?
Sort of, no. I mean, I live in the suburbs, so I don't spend a lot of time downtown. You know, there's been a lot of change in the place where I live. So I live in Dublin, which is a suburb known for its golf course. That's where the Muirfield golf tournament is each year. But anyway, so in Dublin, the city just completed this massive new sort of this new urbanist downtown development with 5-story apartment buildings and shops and all of that. So I mean, things have changed a lot where I live. I mean, you know, downtown Columbus is downtown Columbus.
Yeah, Germantown's a special place.
German Village I was just there this weekend, actually. Yeah, it's something.
Yeah, no, for me, it was just when I first went there in like around 2002, 2003. And first time I crossed my border, and my friend was actually asked if he was ever a card-carrying member of the Communist Party. That was fun.
Really?
Yeah. But we went down, and it just struck me because I'm from Hamilton, which is this very cross-cultural community. And I went to, I never really had been to a place that was still so predominantly WASP. There was white Anglo-Saxons and there was Black people, but there was nothing else. And I mean by nothing else, there was no Greeks, there was no Italians, there was no Russians, there's no Poles, there's none of that. It was just like, that was the class. And I mean, and then now that I go down, when I went there, you know, you had a lot more different people there. I mean, all the servers were from India, Pakistan, or something like that.
Yeah.
It was just like, just shocking when I went there in 2002 and saw, I'm like, where are all the other people?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's how I felt when I first went to Hillsdale, because I mean, I grew up in, again, a suburb. Most of my friends were Indians, Koreans, Pakistanis, you know. White kids were not a very competent group at my school as a whole. So it was strange going to a place where everybody was, you know, smart and white. but you know, I mean, I'm not going to draw any woke conclusions from that. Columbus historically was a very German city. So they were basically Germans and, you know, standard, waspy Americans. And then, so I think there is a place called Italian Village. I don't know if it had a very large Italian population, but Columbus doesn't have, you know, a little Italy or a little this. Now there's a little Somalia, I think, but
now.
So, you know, immigration in recent years has brought a lot of Asians, Middle Eastern people, you know, into city. But I think maybe what you experienced has to do with just the area you were in.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, Columbus it's not New York City, you know.
Yeah. It just kind of struck me that kind of Midwestern difference that you really do see when you still travel to some of these cities. I'm sure I ended up down in Minneapolis somehow because your country's it sounds like they're finally going to decide to open the border. I read something about that today, but like Chuck Schumer was yelling at Canada since May to reopen our border. And it turns out it's his country that's now dragging the feet. But
I find it amazing that Canadians haven't been allowed to cross the border for, I mean, has it been more than a year?
It's sort of like if you have a good enough reason, you can get down there. It's just the government here made it really hard for you to come back. You would have to spend time in the quarantine hotel, which was really expensive. But if you had property, you could get down there.
Okay, that's
so
good.
It wasn't like a really tough thing. There's definitely people I read in the paper. I went down to get my COVID shots early, and they just flew down to Florida because they had their winter home there, and they were allowed.
Okay,
So,
I mean, I know things were like that in Britain. You know,
other places were a lot tougher.
About all the ridiculous rules and procedures and things that the government put in place to make it hard to travel, but not impossible.
Yeah.
So
here
I've only been traveling locally during this whole thing, so I haven't really seen what things. The farthest I traveled during the pandemic was St. Louis, so which is now a hellhole. But
I have friends from St. Louis, and everything I've heard has always been a very different place.
Yeah, I mean, I was there in March, and things were more normal there actually than here at that point. But now, you know, I mean, who knows if people are following the rules, but
Well, I was talking to my neighbors, and they went down to Niagara Falls on Saturday, and they said the entire place was pretty much maskless.
Yeah, I mean, that's good. Hope it stays that way.
Yeah. Well, you got to understand Canada's after Israel, in about another month, we'll probably be the most vaccinated country on the planet.
Okay. Good. I mean, which means you can go back to normal, right?
If you're from Manitoba on to British Columbia, it is normal.
Okay.
And then Ottawa and Quebec are kind of semi-normal. like you're still wearing masks indoors, but otherwise, and they have limitations on stuff. So it's very like the early portion of the opening. I think they want to see if things spike in September, and they're just being baby steps. And then the East Coast is like, you have to register to enter the province.
Yeah. 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 I mean,
Anyways,
I'm glad I'm an American. No offense, but
yeah, no. It has been better. Like the thing was like, now it's starting to open up, but I mean, like in America, if you really wanted to, you could just go to Florida. There was always a place to go, or South Dakota. There was always a safe place. In Canada, there was never a safe place.
Yeah, the poor people in Saskatchewan, I'm sure they were jealous of their southern neighbors.
So you said maybe we should ask you a bit about Hillsdale, since we always hear it on various podcasts on Ricochet and that. So what was you said it was a very different experience for you when you went there. So what was it like what's it like at that school?
What's it like? Well, I think the thing to say for a Ricochet audience is that there are actually a lot of different Hillsdales. There's political Hillsdale, the place where, the kind of place advertised on the Rush Limbaugh show. And then there is Christian Hillsdale. There are a lot of students who are very, they're the sons and daughters of pastors or missionaries, and they're there. There's a very Christian sort of culture at the school. And then there's classical liberal arts Hillsdale. I mean, people who come because they want to study the great books, So there are different groups of students at the college. And then there are the athletes who, I mean, I guess they're there to play sports, but it has a lot of different cultures within it. It's a more diverse place intellectually maybe than people would think. I'm a little worried though by the amount of wokeness I've seen from some of the students, but it's hard to say. I've seen there's been a lot of that on social media. So, I do know that, I mean, the professors there are great. I had incredible, inspirational professors. These people, I don't know how they do it. I mean, they manage to be they know everything. They're incredibly interesting. They lecture beautifully. They're confident. They have 10 kids. They're a member of this and that. I don't even know. I don't know how it's humanly possible to be that productive. But, so I loved Hillsdale. I think it's a great place for somebody who wants one of the things it offers. It's a good place if you're an intellectual sort, you're conservative, you're Christian. The administration is less loved by the students than the advertising makes it seem, but that's always the case, I guess.
Okay. Well,
very musical school too. So if you're interested in music, it's a good place.
I'm going to try to phrase a question.
Okay.
You
can try to phrase an answer.
Yeah, well, you're young, Keph, and
baby.
I'm just thinking about how when you said that there's a little bit of wokeism creeping into Hillsdale. Can you trace over, say, the age of the life of a student at Hillsdale? When do they become woke? And more importantly, can you guess how they became woke?
Yeah. I think in a lot of cases, people go to Hillsdale because their parents expect them to. And they're always I think a lot of people arrive somewhat burned out by the whole classical, liberal arts thing, because they've gone to classical schools, they've been homeschooled, they've been hearing about Aristotle since they were 3. So I think there's a desire for something different among the students by that point. I mean, I didn't have that problem because I went to public school, so I was deprived of an education, But so that causes some of it. I think that a desire for exploration, new things. There are some students who just are resentful, secretly, and they discover other people who share their resentments, and then they, come out of the closet at the end of being at Hillsdale, or they do this or that. Then there are people who I mean, something I've seen is, I think students who were somewhat sheltered, going off, teaching, and seeing real dysfunction and poverty for the first time, and then finding, you know, identity politics or critical theory more plausible, and adopting parts of it, because, you know, you grow up in this wonderful family with 10 kids and you're Catholic and you don't really get outside that bubble. And then you end up teaching at a private school and filled with students from the inner city, and you see that poverty for the first time and you think, you know, well, this is bad. And the explanations for it given by popular culture seem plausible. So I think there are a variety of reasons, you know, that there are, of course, people who interpret Christianity and scripture as requiring, you know, social justice and things like that. I know last summer there were a lot of people angry at the college for not jumping on the BLM bandwagon, because Hillsdale, you know, when it was founded, admitted people were Black. So people looked at the legacy of the school and said, you know, you were influential in the civil rights movement, or, you know, in the abolitionist movement. So why are you not following? Why aren't you part of this equivalent movement in 2021? You know, so I think it just sort of happens slowly to people. Maybe even happens after they graduate.
Yeah.
Did you find a lot of the people there were, at least because they came from homeschoolers, they came from those backgrounds, did they have any kind of like, there weren't a lot of people who were snowplow children, or we call it, my sister called them snowplow parents, who basically, or the helicopter parents who were getting in their way. At least they didn't have that as a disadvantage.
I mean, there were some people who were very sheltered and somewhat awkward, and clearly their parents had been very hovering and sort of afraid of exposing them to things. But a lot of the homeschool kids were well adjusted and happy and normal, and just more functional than the average high schooler, you know.
Yeah.
So I think, I mean, it's a school that doesn't attract a lot of, I mean, if you're somebody who's homeschooled and your parents have just neglected you, you're not going to end up at a selective college like Hillsdale, you know? So, I mean, my experiences with homeschool people were great. So if I have kids, you know, it's an option. I don't really want to send them to public school.
Oh yeah, same here. Flecker?
Well, I just haven't, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just wondering if you would disappear. Or...
Oh, no, I'm just thinking about a young person I know. I guess she's not so much young anymore. She's probably 20, she's probably 30 now. But she was homeschooled, she was creative, she was smart, and she I forget which University of California she went to, but she went through under full scholarship. And then she went on to Columbia, full scholarship, got a degree, I think, in journalism. I'm not sure.
Oh, dear.
Interestingly, she works for a historical society now. Hi, in case you're watching.
Hello.
She works for, yeah. And she does PR for it, I think, but I'm not sure. Or she did, but when she was going to the University of California, she went to Bible studies. It was a Christian homeschooling thing. Her parents were are Christians, and she went to Bible studies, and she said that we were allowed to bring any book but the Bible, and they were allowed to talk about anything but the Bible. And that was in her first year at school, I think.
Is that a joke?
No.
So there's a Bible study.
There really were Bible studies.
This was a university-sponsored Bible studies club, wow. I guess. And for all I know, she may be listening, so I have to be very careful. But after 6 years of just straight A work in college and being so brainy. She came home and she said that she is a liberal Christian.
Yeah.
And her mother said, "There's no such thing as a liberal Christian." And she said, "Yes, there is." And
My church is full of them.
Pardon?
My church is full of them. Most of the people I know who are Christians are liberal NDP, what we call would be considered Democrats in the United States. It's Christianity is very liberal. It's not a very conservative thing here.
Episcopal church in Canada?
What's that?
You have an Episcopal church in Canada?
We have the Anglican Church of Canada.
The Anglican is actually not as liberal as the Episcopal Church.
Okay.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so part of the problem, I suspect, I'm just guessing. I mean, part of the problem is being in that kind of environment. The other part of the problem is personality type, you know? I think psychology is really an important part of politics. I used to hate people who said that, but I think it's undeniable, you know, that left-wing Christianity tends to appeal to people of a certain personality type, people who are very agreeable. I mean, I don't want to go too, again, I don't want to insult anybody, but
let me just say, go ahead, sorry. I was going to argue.
Yeah. So, you know, people on the left who consider themselves Christian look at the Bible and say, well, Jesus told us that we have to care for the poor, we have to care for everybody. And they draw from it this conclusion that basically we're obligated to perfect the world. And that, you know, if we're not doing that through our politics, then we're failing in some way.
There are schools of Christian thought that say that churches are supposed to take over the world, essentially.
Yeah.
But I don't consider them to be really, well, Christian. I consider them to be more something else. I don't know what else.
To me, the answer for those people. Oh, go ahead.
No, I don't. I guess I just want to say one thing. As I've been on Ricochet and I've been talking to, you know, I guess everyone who reads my comments knows that I'm a Christian. And I think that I'm more of a fundamental Christian than I thought when I joined. But it does bring out that my interactions cements my view that Christianity is completely voluntary. Every good act, every act of grace and of mercy and generosity in Christianity is supposed to be voluntary, and not even voluntary with grudgingly, but open-handedly and happily. And I just don't see that in liberalism. It seems like liberal Christians, they're my brothers and sisters, but they seem to want to make other people give liberally. And I think that's a big divide.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, I think also there's a tendency to think among people within this group that, so in general, I think people these days, especially Americans these days, are emotivists. It's a word from philosophy, I guess, ethics. Emotivism is the position that, again, there are no criteria. You know, we can't judge actions as good or bad. You know, those actions are merely reflective of some kind of emotional state. So, you know, I can't call something beautiful. I can only say that it triggers certain emotional reactions in me. And people are obsessed with emotional states in our politics. I think there are a lot of people who, and these are the people who tend to virtue signal, who think that having emotional reactions to things makes them good. You know, if I'm outraged on behalf of somebody else, I'm a good person. But I'm going to advertise this to the world. And, you know, maybe I'll inspire people to do things, other people, of course. But I just think that's corrupting, you know. I think charity should be when people are loving and acting charitably. They should be loving and acting charitably toward people who are there in front of them, people they know, people they can actually have a relationship with. This sort of emoting and gushing all over everything for the sake of emoting and gushing is not helpful. And it's not love either. Just saying, you know, I cry because somebody was mean to somebody else. I mean, you know, which is how transgenderism has evolved. I mean, that's just, but that's the only argument these people make. It's, well, you're bad because you're causing offense. You know, anyway, I just think we've become so performative and just abstracted from actual relationships that we've lost a sense of what charity actually is.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking about during the Civil War or leading up to it, there were abolitionist societies, and there were poorhouses and almshouses in England, and there were soup kitchens and soup lines, and there was a lot of charity work. And I think that the Great Society, I mean, I'm guessing the Great Society, after the Great Society, I've heard people that remember Medicaid coming into effect. They said that you know, you weren't allowed to, you had to charge I remember talking to a doctor who said, when Medicaid came along, you had to charge a patient, and you had to build a state. You weren't allowed to take chickens, or at least you weren't allowed to do it for free. And I think that is in competition intellectually and emotionally with generosity and charity. And people, I mean, I ran into that just this morning when I was saying, but this family just got $2,000 in pub money or whatever that is. I don't know, in COVID money. And anyway, so it just affects my feelings, my thinkings, my motivations in terms of being generous, because essentially I'm being taxed, and the money is being given to them, and I don't have any say in it. I don't have any oversight over it either.
I mean, you avoid the direct responsibility of doing all that when, I mean, it's very easy to just say, well, we'll just give all our money away, and then people who are experts can, you know, divvy it up, hand it out. They know what to do with it. So
it reminds me of I was trying to remember the name of the author. He used to do one of the podcasts with Charles Cook on Ricochet. Was that
Kevin Williamson?
Yes. So I read one of his books, and he was talking about the way things used to be back in the day, before we got Medicare and all these other things. And he talked about how you remember watching the Flintstones, and they all had those big bull mastodon hats that they wear, and they would go to like the club with each other. Turns out those social clubs used to do other things too. If you're a long-term member of that, your widows and your pensioners and all that would be taken by the care of that society. They would hire doctors at a medical school to take care of the elderly in their community, and they would go, like, doctors don't do house calls. Well, these house doctors would go and do house calls. They'd go to the widow's house and make sure they're okay, and everyone did that way. And you would get a lot better services. All the social services that used to be done, that are now doing by the government, were now being done by these private clubs back then, and you would get a lot better results because, you know, you're accountable to your membership on a much better scale than you were getting from the government, which is accountable to maybe their union.
I mean, I don't remember that because I'm young, but I can daydream about those wonderful days. I mean, you know, I would have died back then, I'm sure, from the cold or a cut or something, but you know.
There's some differences, but I mean, why don't we take the advanced medical technology and one of those good things we could have preserved from the past is the benevolent society. We still do have a little bit of them around here, you know, the Rotary Club and the Lions Club, but they used to be a lot more bigger.
So I mean, how does Canada compare to the US in that way? Because people talk a lot about, you know, civil society in the US. Tocqueville wrote about it. Everybody mentions Tocqueville, you know. But did Canada basically have the same kind of culture?
Yeah, we did have a lot of that kind of stuff, and a lot of it was done by churches or by organizations like that. And I think we got there quicker to the bureaucratic society than you did. And we're also suffering from the fact, like, everyone thinks Canadian healthcare is great, and I'll say, you won't go bankrupt under Canadian healthcare. You just die, or you suffer greatly before you get the healthcare you might need.
Yeah. So if you're perfectly healthy and young, you know, it seems great, right? But then, yeah.
So that's kind of our issue. But, you know, it's people just don't remember what we used to be and how we could or restart things if things went out of the way. They're just like, well, I had a friend of mine who used to argue with her, and she got tired of me, and she said something like, what would we do if they abolished the Department of Education? I'm like, compared to 1979, I don't recall that your education was so terrible in 1979.
I mean, yeah, no. Well, we need to abolish the whole system of public schooling and invent something new. I mean, I say bring back one-room schoolhouses, but it's
well, or at least get rid of the unions.
Well, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Well, one of the benefits of one-room schoolhousing was that you would have all the grades together. So the older kids would help teach the younger kids.
Yep.
That's some of the private schoolings I've been looking at in the States. Some of the Sudbury schools, they seem to do that.
I went to school in the 60s and early 70s, and I remember that I think that the graduating class was 2000, or maybe the school membership was 2000, but we had so many students and so many teachers. Teachers could actually teach. I actually took in 9th grade, I took a law class, and that was in 9th grade, and in 10th grade I took an art history class, and I mean these were formative for me. I mean, I still know who Syax was. I still, the sculptor or the potter. But so schools weren't necessarily bad in the 60s. But then, when did the teachers' union become? Was that in the 60s, or was that much earlier?
Well, it took decades for the rot to get to where it was. So it starts off pretty good, and then it gets worse. One of the other things they used to say that made a real difference is that for young women, one of the best things you could do to get yourself is to get a job as a school teacher. So you always ended up getting some of the best and brightest, sharpest women were doing this. But eventually, as the workforce became wider and they got more job opportunities, all the best and the brightest went into wherever they went, and you don't have the best and brightest of women going into schooling. You just have a lot of the people just want the time servers, I guess. You get your 30 years in, and then you can retire and get $2,600 a month from the government and watch Days of Your Lives for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably true. I mean, corporate America has stolen all the talent from the schools.
But then why do school teachers get paid so much more than I think they get paid more than the going rate
it depends on where you are, but
than private.
Because they can take time off work and go work for Democrats directly and basically be paid by taxpayers to help elect the party that will give them more benefits in exchange for free labor. Taxpayers subsidizing the election workers.
Never thought of that.
Yeah, I know that a lot of unions have negotiated contracts that basically make pay dependent on seniority. So, people start off making not very much money, but then by the time they're close to retirement, they're rich.
Well, here it's like last 15, 17 years. And a friend of mine, I once like published the list because it's on the union website. They gave their members it, and you can go there and look at it. And my friend's like, that's only like the top people in the schools. And I'm like, Nick, said to my friend Nick, yeah. And 2/3 of the teachers are in the top bracket. They've been, that's how long seniority, because we don't have mandatory retirement here anymore either. So like, yeah, so you get out of your school, you had your education degree, so you're 22, 23, you worked 17 years, you get to the top rate, you're now at 40, 45, making close to 100,000 Canadian a year.
Wow. And you're teaching CRT and trans whatever. Yeah.
Well, not a depressing note. Why don't we talk about something? We're getting close to the end of the show here, so why don't we talk about something less grim? You said you played saxophone in a band?
Yeah, when I was at Hillsdale, I was in the jazz band. Now, I mean, I can't say that I was or am, I'm not John Coltrane, I'm not Cannonball Adderley, I'm not, but I had fun playing that. I like jazz. I need to play more. Done a bad job of practicing since I graduated. It's hard. I mean, it's much easier to be involved with music when you're in school. It becomes hard afterward because there aren't a lot of local opportunities. I mean, there are always community bands, but they tend to play, theme songs from TV shows. So if you want to play serious classical music or serious jazz, it's hard to find a group. But
too bad you couldn't come up here and join my church. We have a very serious classical section going on here.
That's good. Churches need good music. I mean, I wish if I played a piano or something, if I could play the organ, I'd love to be, the person who plays at mass or something. That would be great. But there's not much use for a saxophone in a church unless you're at St. John Coltrane's African Orthodox Church in San Francisco.
Okay.
There's a church in San Francisco that features jazz, and it's really just a jazz club, but it's a church in the African Orthodox Church. I don't know how that works, but because Coltrane was strange and spiritual in ways that I don't understand. But
that's the beauty of music. Sometimes you don't have to understand it, or it's best that you don't understand it.
Well, yeah, I mean, music is a beautiful thing. I will say that music is probably the only art form that hasn't been destroyed by modernity. The painting is, the visual arts have all been destroyed. Architecture, sculpture, painting, drawing, but music endures for some reason.
So you don't think heavy metal destroyed music?
No, I mean, my own tastes are varied. I mean, I like instrumental music. I don't just listen to instrumental music, but I like the instrumental parts of music. So I'm in it for the sounds. So there's a lot of music that, would make a classical purist scream that I like. I mean, I don't really listen to things like Wagner. But, I can appreciate that. Although as far as classical music goes, I like the Romantics more, people like Chopin and Rachmaninoff, but.
Only middle-aged single English chief inspectors like Wagner. So there you go.
Is that a reference to Inspector Morse or
yes,
something?
that is definitely an Inspector Morse reference.
Roger Scruton also likes Wagner, but he's dead now, alas. And he was single for a long time, but he did marry and have kids. So there is hope for the Wagner people in the world.
I need to start listening to Wagner then. Well, Flicker, you got anything else to follow up on there?
No, I'm just thinking about Dvorak, the difference between Dvorak and Bacharach. I like them both.
Okay.
And I'm,
Well,
and I'm not going to say rap is not music, but
Well, rap is rhythmic talking. I mean, it's maybe with some very simple, some elements of music in the background, but I don't really think of rap when I think of music either.
it's the poetry I wrote when I was 6.
Maybe, I mean, there's a canon. It's an art form. There are people who do it well by the rules of that art form, but I don't like it. So
yeah,
I must have missed the rules.
Except for a few songs here and there. I'm not a big rap person. Well, I guess on that note, I'll try and figure out some way to cobble everything together for this show, so it kind of doesn't seem quite so disjointed at the beginning. But other than that, it's been a great talking to you and learning all about architecture and Hillsdale and all the other things you talked about.
No, it was fun.
It was good.
Okay,
I liked it.
Okay, well, I'll see you guys in the comments on Ricochet.
Right. See you. Nice talking with you, Keph.
Yep. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.